So everybody, I have a confession to make, and it's a strange confession. So it's not really that strange a confession. It's mostly, I have to tell you that I've completely changed my mind on something. And I've changed it based on new technology, new software, new improvements, and it's completely turned my world around. So the technique I described in the past as my personal favorite was to photograph in JPEG with in-camera noise reduction, cull in Photomechanic, not really an editing thing, but it's a great way to cull photos, to edit in Lightroom, to run it through Topaz Denoise, and then finish off in Lightroom with your final edits. Now the reason I've used that technique in the past is because of two things. First, Lightroom, I think noise reduction is not very good. I'm going to show you here in a minute. And second, Topaz Denoise did not handle RAW files very well. In fact, it was horrible. And until you put a JPEG or a TIFF file through it, the results were not very pleasurable. So that's why I said what I said. Plus, JPEG with in-camera noise reduction is not that bad, quite frankly, and a lot of pros use it. So with that, I'm going to show you the new Topaz Denoise, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to show you three techniques. I'm going to call it good, better, and best. All three are acceptable, but you might find that you want to go all the way to the very end. And frankly, it doesn't take much more time to do the best than the better. Let's go. So the first image I want to just show is just as the base of reference is the original RAW file. I picked this particular file because I know it's sharp and it was exposed properly. In fact, I think it was slightly overexposed. Okay, here we are is the RAW file. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and so you can see it a little bit better. We see some speckling here. It's not super sharp in the original RAW. That's pretty typical with RAW photos. However, what you can see here is you can still see stitching and patterns in his uniform down here. You know, it's important details there. If we look here in the background, that's where you can really see all of the various colors from the noise. Those are the things we want to really clean up. So now we know what the original RAW image looks like. Let's see what we can get and make this even better, all right? First, we're going to start with JPEG in-camera noise reduction. We're going to call this the good methodology. All right, here we have a JPEG. This is straight out of camera. As you can see with the JPEG, it is more contrasty than the original RAW, which is to be expected because it's been compressed. It is a little bit sharper though. The camera did some sharpening. You can see the Riddell here name, that's sharper lettering. His eyes, he has nice white in his eyes, which is great. The skin tone's good. Now let's show some differences and some potential problems here. As you go down to his uniform, and I'll compare the two, you lose a lot of the details in the uniform. And see, especially right in here, this pattern right here on the RAW side, you completely lose on the JPEG. Now again, this is acceptable, and a lot of pros would go with this and say it's good to go. And for a lot of people who don't want to mess around with this any more than they have to, JPEG in-camera noise reduction does the job for you. Really just need to take it into your favorite editor, do a little editing, a little tweaking, and you're good to go. And it's plenty sharp and ready to roll, right? Okay, so let's call that the good. So let's go to what I now call the better mode. In this case, we're still going to shoot that JPEG in-camera noise reduction, but we're going to add some Topaz Denoise. All right, let's go. Now, the interesting thing with Topaz Denoise is you can see up here in the right-hand corner, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different modes. Standard, clear, low light, severe noise, and RAW. RAW won't work with JPEGs or TIFFs, but once we get into the RAW phase of this little demonstration, that's when that will come into play. Now, cool thing about Denoise AI is it lets you compare and contrast to see which ones you like better. And so I have standard, clear, low light, and severe noise. So what you do right now is, what I normally do is I will compare and contrast, see which ones I like better. And then if I have a large number of images, that were shot similarly under similar lighting conditions, I'll just apply it to the whole darn thing. Or you could do it individually. I don't recommend that. It would take forever unless you only have a couple images to deal with. So in this case, let's take a look at it. The standard mode looks a little grainy to me. Clear up at the upper right-hand corner. I kind of like clear. In fact, they recommend it for faces. So that's usually the one I go with. There's low light in the lower left-hand corner, which is looking pretty good. And then severe noise in the lower right. Severe noise to me looks a little more grainy, as does the standard. It's kind of a toss-up between the low light and the clear for me. I think I'm going to go with clear. And this is one of those things where you probably cannot tell the difference if you're looking at a small screen on a mobile device. But I think between the two of them, I'm kind of liking the clear. So what I would do in this case is, say I have large number, I would just batch them, run it through the clear with the same settings, and it'd be done with it. Now, assuming I go with clear, I would save the image here. There's a couple of choices you need to make here about what style, or excuse me, what format you're going to go with. You can keep it in TIFF, and I've done that before. You could take it down here to DNG, which kind of emulates a RAW file. That's Adobe's version of a RAW file. I think they work very similarly. I would go with either the TIFF or the DNG. I haven't really been able to tell a huge difference between them. It's going to go to town. It takes a few minutes, or a few seconds, I should say, to process. It depends on the file size and how much work it's doing, and your computer, of course. So in the end, it took 17 seconds. What I've noticed in batch filing is the first couple may take a while, longer, I should say, and then by the time you start moving down several, it starts to speed up. I'm not sure why, but it does. And we close the panel, and we'll call it. So let's go find that image and see how it came out. So here's that JPEG that we ran through denoise in the clear mode. Now let's compare it to the JPEG without any denoise. I think it is somewhat of an improvement. To me, it's smoother overall, less grain than the original JPEG with in-camera noise reduction. All right, let's move on to what I call the best mode. And that's using your RAW file straight into Topaz Denoise and using that new RAW module that they have in there, which they did not have before. Now, before I do that, I know there's some Lightroom users out there who are sitting there saying, Jack, I don't need to use that Topaz Denoise. I use Lightroom, it looks fine. Well, stick with me to the end, and I'm going to illustrate to you why I no longer use Lightroom for noise reduction in low light situations. All right, let's get to the best. All right, so I've got Topaz Denoise open, and this is the original file, the raw NEF file, Nikon NEF file. And the modes I've got going on right now are the raw on the upper left, clear in the upper right, low light in the lower left, and severe noise in the lower right. So just like I did with the JPEGs, we're going to compare all four of them and decide which one we think looks best. And once again, I know if you're looking at a mobile device, you probably can't see the detail here. This is what I see right here. The raw looks pretty good. I see lots of detail, slight grain pattern to it. Clear has less grain to it, although I think it tends to smooth things out a little bit more. Low light doesn't look too bad. I kind of like the low light. And then we have severe noise. You know, the interesting thing is, I have found that severe noise doesn't really work very well for me, even though you would think it would at these really high ISOs. I just don't, I haven't really been impressed with the results. What I find what looks best for me is clear and raw with raw files. I think the low light in this case looks a little too smooth, too plasticky, and that's not what I really want to do. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to save a version of the raw in the raw mode, and I'm going to save one in the clear mode, and we're going to compare the two and see how they came out. All right, let's do that. So these two files you're looking at right now, on the left is what I did was I took raw file through Topaz Denoise, converted it to DNG in Topaz Denoise, made corrections in Lightroom, and then saved it as a JPEG so we could view it here. On the photo on the right, same process, except I used the clear mode in Topaz Denoise. Let's take a look at the differences and see which one we prefer. All right, the one on the left is slightly grainier than the clear version. What I do like about it is if you go down here, you could see all the stitching in his uniform. And I think that's pretty impressive for a high ISO, 12,800 ISO image that we've got right here. So it looks, but it's slightly grainier. The one on the right, the clear version, I think it looks a lot smoother. Initially to the eye, I think it looks more appealing. The only downside I see with the clear version is you lose all the little stitching in his uniform, which you got in the raw version. So I guess it's kind of a matter of personal taste here. I think his face looks better in the clear version, but I'm a little disappointed that I lost all the details in his uniform. But either way, this is pretty darn impressive. And let me make one more point, and let's compare this raw version to the straight up JPEG that I showed you earlier. You remember when we went straight from JPEG into Topaz Denoise. All right, so now I have on the left-hand side, I have the raw file processed through Denoise in the raw mode. On the right side, I have the JPEG, which went through Denoise in the clear mode, which I think worked best with JPEG. You can see some significant differences. The one on the left, that was the raw file, you can still see a lot of detail in the shadows, which you completely lose with the JPEG. The JPEG is far more contrasting and you lose detail in the shadows. Scrolling down, let's look at that uniform. Again, lots of details in the uniform on the raw side, lots of details lost on the right-hand side with the JPEG. So this is why I'm telling you, I really like this new raw mode in Topaz Denoise, and I plan to use it more and more in the future. You know, I like to experiment, I like to see what works, but right now I am like super impressed with what Topaz has done with denoising raw photos. Now, I promised you earlier that I would show you why I don't like to use Lightroom anymore for high ISO noise reduction. Let's get to that. Okay, up on the screen right now, there are two images. The one on the left is still that raw file that I put through the raw mode with Topaz Denoise. On the right is a JPEG, which was the raw file I took through Lightroom. I did the very best I could to match the amount of noise reduction, color grading, everything else. Let's look at the differences between the two of them. So we've already looked at the raw file, you know what that looks like. Let's look at that JPEG on the right, again, processed through Lightroom with their noise reduction. What I want you to focus on is, first of all, his skin tones. There's very little variation in his skin tones compared to the one on the left, that raw file. And this is the one thing that really bugs me about Lightroom. You can see his skin tones actually bled into the black of his face mask right here, which you do not see. You didn't see it on that JPEG, and you didn't see it in this file right here. As far as the details, it doesn't lose as much detail as the Denoise clear, so you still retain some of those details. But the fact that the colors are starting to blend together, it just really bothers me, and I don't like it at all, and that's why I don't use Lightroom anymore. If you never used Topaz Denoise, I highly recommend you at least give it a shot. There's a link down below, and if you do choose to buy it, there's a 15% off code that you can use there too. All right, thank you for joining me, and while you're here, you might want to check out this video right here. All right, I'll see you next time.